HSA Prep, because now it counts.
Good afternoon. Welcome to HSA Prep. I'm Mr. Wilson from Surrattsville High School, and I'm here to help you try and do a great job on your HSA this year. Hopefully, I will have a lot of information that will give you some tips on making the best HSA possible for you. A lot of times students ask, what are some of the best ideas for doing their best on the government HSA? Well, I've put it into 5 easy to remember things to do. The first thing you should do while you're completing your government HSA is take your time. The people who have created the HSA have done a really good job of making sure that you have enough time to complete each section. They are quite generous with the time. It doesn't mean that you can spend forever on one single question, but what it does mean is that you don't have to race through the test and make silly errors. Generally, the government HSA is broken up into 3 sessions, each of a relatively equal amount of time. You have a generous amount of time each session with a short break in between. Use that time wisely. Watch the clock. Watch the proctor or the administrator of the HSA exam because they will let you know how much time remains. Use that time wisely. If there's 90 questions, for example, on a section, knowing that you have so much time remaining will help you use that time in a more orderly fashion. You can also do some of these other things. Try reading each question carefully. Don't just race ahead and try to figure out what the answer is before you've thought it through. Read the question carefully. Read each of the answer choices carefully. Oftentimes, the answer choices will look very similar. The people who wrote these answer choices, they're trying to trick you sometimes. They're trying to make them so similar that you won't notice the differences, and then you'll be confused. Because they want to make sure that whoever answers that question knows their material well. So reading the question carefully and reading the choice carefully will help you make your best answer. A third thing that you can do is for each question, ask yourself, what level of the government is this question about? Is it the state level, the local level, the national level? Knowing which level of government is being involved will give you a lot of information about how best to answer the question, even if the question isn't asking you if it's the state, local, or national level of government. Using that background knowledge that you have can help you answer the question. Similarly, number 4, you can ask yourself, which branch of government is this question asking me about? Is it the legislative branch, the judicial branch, the executive branch? Again, knowing which branch of government is being looked at in the question can help you answer the question better. You can do that because you know certain words or phrases go with the different branches or with the different levels of the federal government. You can use that information to make informed choices on your answers. And then finally, the thing that I think most students need to do, and they oftentimes skip, is number 5 here. Check your answers. You are allowed in the HSA to go back through a single section and look at those answers. Well, check them over. If you still have 5 or 6 minutes left before the end of the session, go through that session and check some of those answers. Make sure you bubbled in what you thought you bubbled in. Or if you're doing the test on a computer, make sure you've clicked what you have thought you've clicked on. You might have put down the wrong answer even though you knew the answer. Check to make sure that you have thought everything through. Make sure you've read the question. If there was a question that just baffled you, sometimes it's a good idea to leave that question until the end. Again, checking your answers can help you. Remember, there are usually 3 sections on the test. You cannot work ahead and you cannot work behind, but you can work within a separate section of the test. So check those answers before time runs out. Another aspect that you have to know about in order to do well on the HSA is know about Maryland government. You live in the state of Maryland. This is the HSA, the high school assessment for the state of Maryland, and it's on LSN, local, state, and national government. So local and state is part of Maryland. So Maryland is something that you need to know a little bit about. So hopefully you paid attention in your LSN class while you were learning about the government of Maryland or the government of Prince George's County. Here's a good example of a question involving Maryland. The political institution in Maryland, most like the United States Congress, is the, and then they give you 3 parts of government, and they want you to see if you can make that comparison. Is it A, State Archives, B, General Court, C, Court of Appeals, or D, General Assembly? So you need to think first, the United States Congress, what is it? Hopefully you remember that the Congress is the main body in the legislative branch of our government. They make the laws. So you need to figure out who makes the laws in Maryland. Which part of that is the legislative branch? Because that will be the one that's the most like Congress. So let's look at the possible answers and see if we can figure out which one it is. Is it A, the state archives? Hopefully, you know that an archive is a place where things are stored, specifically important documents and artifacts. Congress doesn't really store a whole lot of important documents or artifacts. We have the National Archives for that. So, state archives, even though it has the word state in it, that couldn't really be the answer. B, general court. Well, a general court sounds nice, but is a court the same as Congress? Well, no. Congress makes laws. They don't decide if somebody's guilty or if somebody needs to pay damages, and they don't interpret the law. So Congress isn't going to be anything like a general court. And that also doesn't seem to have anything to do with the state either. So B can't be the answer. How about C, Court of Appeals? Well, if you've ever paid attention to what goes on in Annapolis, you know that we do have a Court of Appeals in the state of Maryland. But once again, there's that word court. Do courts and Congress do the same thing? Well, no, they don't. Congress makes laws, courts interpret laws. Not the same thing. So they couldn't possibly be the answer either. So that means A, B, and C are wrong. Let's see if D, which is what we've decided we're left with, let's see if that's what's correct. General Assembly. Well, if you haven't paid a lot of attention, you can still figure out that D is the right answer. General Assembly is the lawmaking body that's in Maryland. If you've ever visited Annapolis, you may have seen the State House. That's where the General Assembly meets. It has 2 chambers, just like Congress. They make laws there, just like Congress. And if you know that the word assembly means to gather, and you know that Congress also means to gather, you know that those 2 words mean relatively the same thing. And so you could also use that as another way to make your way to the answer. The General Assembly is our bicameral legislature, just like Congress is our nation's bicameral legislature. So they are most alike. D is the right answer. And that's a great example of using your knowledge of Maryland on the HSA. Again, there won't be thousands of questions on the HSA about Maryland law or about Maryland government, but there will be several of them. And knowing your Maryland government is important. Another question that does have something to do with Maryland, but also has to do with the environment, is this question here. And oftentimes on the HSA, they will ask questions that involve things that the government does. For example, the government does things with the environment. The government does things with construction. The government does do things that involve things other than law. For example, education. So knowing these things will help you also answer these questions. Also, though, this question involves using your knowledge of Maryland as well as your knowledge of the United States. The question is, which of these would most likely require interstate cooperation? Wow, interstate cooperation. That sounds complicated. Interstate, hopefully you've learned your SAT words. Inter is the prefix that means between, and state means, well, states. So it means between states. And cooperation, hopefully you know that word means that you work together. So which of these 4 activities would require states to work together between themselves? A, B, C, or D? A says, establishment of guided tours at Annapolis. Well, establishing guided tours is certainly something that the government would do. It doesn't have anything to do with laws per se, but you can visit the government at Annapolis or the government in Washington, D.C., or you can visit the government in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or Richmond, Virginia. You can visit the government, and they like to give guided tours. So certainly that falls within the realm of possibility for something the government would do. But is it interstate cooperation that they need? Well, if it's a guided tour of Annapolis, Annapolis only exists in Maryland, would you really need cooperation with states around us to come up with a guided tour? Probably not. It sounds like something Marylanders could do by themselves. We could probably come up with a guided tour of our own capital. How about B? Construction of a civic center in Wicomico County. Well, again, that sounds like something the government might do. We would like to construct different things. The government does construct things like bridges, civic centers. It constructs oftentimes regional activity centers. So all of that could happen. And you know that Wicomico County is a county in Maryland, so that sounds nice. But would it require other states? Well, probably not. I mean, really, is another state going to give us money or give us help in building something that only is going to work in Maryland? Probably not. How about C? Maintenance of historical monuments in Baltimore. Again, that is something that the government does. And because they're historical, it might involve more than one government. It might involve the government of Maryland as well as the city of Baltimore and possibly the county of Baltimore. So that is definitely cooperation going on. But that's not interstate. That's only within the state of Maryland. You're not going to have another state try and make Baltimore better. It's Maryland's opportunity to restore and maintain the monuments there. So these 3, while they might sound like good activities for government, and one of these certainly would require cooperation, none of these require interstate cooperation. So let's see if the one that we're left with, let's see if that is a good one for interstate cooperation. Conservation of oysters in the Chesapeake Bay. Well, government oftentimes does do conservation efforts. That's where they try to keep the environment clean and maintain it. And oysters, well, they do live in the Chesapeake Bay. So let's think about the Chesapeake Bay. Is the Chesapeake only in Maryland? Well, if you know your geography, you know that that's not the case. Most of Chesapeake Bay is around Maryland, yes, but the Chesapeake Bay also is with Virginia and Delaware. And the conservation of the bay would involve the entire watershed of the Chesapeake, which involves several other states as well. So the conservation effort of oysters in the Chesapeake Bay, while it would probably fall a lot in Maryland's back door, it would also come through all of those other states that either border the Chesapeake Bay or have a watershed in the Chesapeake Bay. So it's not going to be just Maryland, it's going to be other states as well. That would mean interstate cooperation would be required, and so the answer for this one is D. That is the most likely that would require interstate cooperation. Again, using common sense as well as your knowledge of LSN can get you through these complicated questions. Another kind of question that gets asked in the HSA is if you can figure out how best something can get done. What this is doing is it's taking your concepts and theories of government and putting them into real life situations. So let's see if we can figure this one out. When proposing new projects such as airports and highways, federal agencies are required to do what? Is it A, increase user fees, B, conduct opinion polls, C, seize private property from citizens, or D, provide environmental impact statements? This one, if you don't know the answer already because you've paid attention in LSN, I bet there's a way we can work on this as well. So if the government, the federal government, is going to do a new project, such as an airport or a highway, which one are they going to do? Well, they might increase user fees. They might, for example, want to make things more expensive. However, they're not required to do that, are they? So it's not A. Let's try B. Conduct opinion polls. Well, again, the government might conduct an opinion poll. The government loves to find out what the opinion of the public is, and that could certainly help. But again, is it required to? Well, no. Not everything needs to be completely popular with everybody. How about C, seize private property from citizens? Well, you know that that's part of eminent domain, and that is something that certainly the government can do, but the government doesn't have to seize your property to do a new highway or a new airport. Oftentimes, they can just take the airport that is already there and fix it, or tear it down and totally remake it. So it's not necessary to always seize private property from citizens. Also, sometimes we have citizens who like to give property away. Some people do that. So let's see if D, which is what we're left with, is the best answer. Provide environmental impact statements. Well, that certainly sounds like something that would be required of the government, to come up with how it's going to affect the environment. That sounds like something that would be a regulation, doesn't it? Also, if you know a little bit about environmental policy from your LSN class, you know that federal agencies are required to do federal environmental impact statements whenever they propose something new, because the United States has lots of laws that are trying to protect and reestablish the environment that we've been destroying. So D not only is the most logical answer, it is also the best answer given what the federal agencies would have to do. So hopefully this has given you some information about how to do a really good job on the HSA, for the LSN portion at least. Have a good afternoon. Thanks.